Hi, welcome to Unit 2 Lecture Notes. In this unit, we'll talk about how to work effectively with coworkers, and we'll cover topics such as diversity, listening, strategic communication, and persuasion from chapters 5, 6, and 8. We'll weave in discussion about peer-worker relationships and work friendships. Let's start with some of the concepts in chapter 5. I think that most of us are aware of our biases. They are intentional or not. Have you ever thought about how others perceive you or what biases they may hold toward you? In this section, we're going to look at that. Starting with diversity. What is diversity? Well, it's the attributes or characteristics that we hold that make us different from one another, or, as I like to think of it, unique. Have you ever assumed someone was similar to you because they looked similar to you? Yes. I've made that mistake too. We have to dig a little deeper, don't we? And get to know the other person a little better to discover what makes them unique and discover their deep level diversity attributes. Did you know that there are two types? Surface level and deep level diversity attributes. Surface level diversity attributes are easily identifiable. They are characteristics such as age, gender, ethnicity, disability, culture. Deep level diversity attributes are not easy to see at first glance. They include values, sexual orientation, education, and certain disabilities. Only by talking to and connecting with a person can we discover what their deep level attributes are. So here are some examples of surface level, and here are some of deep level. So with deep level, we have an unseen disability, economic status and education, political views. It could be sexual orientation and gender as a deep level, and functional knowledge. Many of our modern organizations have moved past passively valuing diversity to actively managing diversity. So it's a switch in thinking. It's more passive to active. It's a multicultural approach that acknowledges, enables, and empowers all organizational individuals. It's a change in mindset and organizational cultural values. Your textbook contains some great strategies in Chapter 5 about how to widen your circle of friends and colleagues by becoming aware of your biases and then engaging with others. So the first step is being aware of those biases before you engage. Did you know the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC as it's better known, is responsible for enforcing federal laws that make it illegal to discriminate against a job applicant or employee because of the person's race, color, religion, or sex. This includes pregnancy, gender identity, and social orientation. It's also illegal to discriminate against a person because the person complained about discrimination, filed a charge of discrimination, or participated in an employment discrimination lawsuit. Most employers with at least 15 employees are covered by EEOC laws. Most labor unions and employment agencies are also covered. The laws apply to all types of work situations, including hiring, firing, promotions, harassment, training, wages, and benefits. Now, don't get the EEOC confused with affirmative action programs. The EEOC is a government agency, and affirmative action programs are those programs that are set in place that seek to remedy past discrimination by implementing proactive steps to prevent current or future discrimination. All right, let's move to Chapter 6 and talk about the ways in which listening and nonverbal communication affect our communication with others. Let's talk about generational diversity. because we have 4 generations in the workforce right now. 4. At the top, we have baby boomers who were born between 1946 and 1964. We have Generation Xers who were born between 1965 and 1980. We have Generation Y, born between 1981 and 1995. And we have Generation Z, born between 1996 and 2010. I'm willing to bet that we have all 4 generations in our online classes, because one of the characteristics of the baby boomer population is constant learning. So baby boomers like to learn, and there are a lot of them still in school. In my house, we have 3 generations. We have boomers, Xers, and Generation Y. No, we have Generation Z. We don't have any Generation Y. That's right. All right, I uploaded a handout to the lecture and supplemental materials in the Unit 2 content. It's very comprehensive, so if you'll take a minute and look at the handout about generational diversity, I think you'll find it interesting, and I think you'll find it applicable to your work environment as well. Let's talk about individual diversity strategies. So we can connect with others that we perceive to be different from us, and that can be generational, cultural. Remember some of those surface and deep characteristics that I talked about a minute ago? This kind of falls hand in hand with it. So we learn to value and respect fundamental differences, and of course this requires an open mind to communication and to what's going on, admitting your biases and prejudices, and then working to reduce them, and dismissing myths about others or other groups. You can minimize miscommunication by simply practicing effective communication skills. Again, open mind. Trying to use words that are inclusive and avoiding derogatory comments about certain groups. The other thing that we can do is to avoid forming an opinion about the way another person is based on their dress, mannerisms, or other things that make them different on the surface. So these are from your book, but I thought that they were really worth emphasizing and thinking about as we become better communicators in our lives and in our work environments. All right, let's go to chapter 6, in which we'll talk about listening and nonverbal communication. So what does it mean to listen? To really listen? And maybe you've heard this information before, and I've heard it a lot since I'm a communication scholar, but it's always worth hearing again and thinking about. So listening involves processing what you hear and showing that you understand. Active listening occurs when you take in information, you process it, try to make sense of it, and then respond. It's really a gift to the speaker. When was the last time you knew that you had someone's complete attention? They were listening to you 100%. It's a pretty awesome thing, isn't it? Passive listening occurs when you take in information, but you don't do anything with it. You're not processing it very much or thinking about it too hard. I think about passive listening when I'm taking notes. I'm listening, but I can't engage in active listening because if I did, it would take away from me writing notes. So I'm just taking in what I hear and I'm writing it on paper. But of course, passive listening occurs a lot in our lives. We'll talk about that in just a minute. Be sure and watch Dr. Alex Lyon's short video about effective listening. It's located in the Unit 2 content under the lecture and supplemental materials. It's very short. So I want you to think about, how does listening well, active listening, affect your work relationships with your coworkers, your supervisors, or clients? How does listening passively affect your work relationships? And do you understand the difference? Here are some guidelines for active listening, or some characteristics of active listening. Ask open-ended questions. Those are those questions that invite comment and don't require the listeners simply say yes or no. Be attentive. Ask follow-up questions. Be tuned into feelings, and you can see the rest there. But you can see that active listening is indeed active, and you have to engage. So in order to be an active listener, you're also an ethical listener. You're one who displays respect for the speaker by being open to what is being communicated. And ethical listeners are courteous and attentive as others speak. Often we're forming responses in our head in order to respond, and that cuts out the active listening or listening effectively. Also, as an ethical listener, you can avoid prejudging the speaker. This doesn't mean you have to agree with the speaker. It means that we should try and understand his or her argument, ideas, or evidence. These two approaches to ethical listening encourage free speech with respect. It also gives the speaker the opportunity to speak without being interrupted. We all know some barriers to active listening, don't we? Boredom, lack of comprehension, just simply not wanting to engage, being tired, or any kind of emotions that are blocking your being able to listen. So let's move on and talk about nonverbal communication. Do you have a friend or partner with whom you share a nonverbal language? It's kind of a shortcut. You know what I mean. Somebody says something in a conversation and you look at your friend, or you roll your eyes, or you just smile, and you have this knowing between you. That's part of that nonverbal language. So I want to touch on a few of the concepts associated with nonverbal communication. Paralanguage, haptics, and proxemics. And you can see them in this poster here. So paralanguage is the tone, volume, pitch, and rate of our voice. The ways in which we use paralanguage impacts the way our message is received. And you may have noticed as I've been talking, I'm emphasizing different words. I'm slowing down my rate of speaking, or I'm speeding up my rate of speaking. That's paralanguage. It's meant to convey meaning or emphasis. Proxemics is about the way we use space. The anthropologist Edward Hall and his colleagues studied the use of space, and communication scholars related it to communication and how space affects communication. So Hall's proxemic theory about space says that there are 4 different zones. The intimate zone, in which a person can stand between 0 to 18 inches from you, that's considered intimate. Personal space, usually reserve this for friends, or intimate space too, 18 inches to 4 feet. Social space, 4 feet to 10 feet. And public space is over 10 feet. So think about some of the people in your life that you allow into your intimate space, your social space. I may have told you guys this story before, but I was at the doctor a few weeks ago and I was seeing the nurse practitioner, and I was sitting down, in a chair, and she was sitting too on a stool, like a rolling chair. And she suddenly rolled over to me and she was touching my knee, and she kept talking to me. And it kind of freaked me out because I thought, you're way too close to me, you're freaking me out. But I just made myself stay still and engage with her. But it was really uncomfortable at first. Then I realized she's the type of person who doesn't think about personal space because, Americans like their personal space. And I just kind of had to work at letting it go. It's interesting though. Proxemic or space differentials are definitely cultural. Americans prefer at least 18 inches of space. And that tells us who we are in close or not so close relationships with, and it does affect communication. All right, I'm going to skip chapter 7 because the course is an upper level communication course and the concepts covered in chapter 7 are very basic. So just please read through it and look at the assertiveness survey. All right, let's move on to our last chapter, which is persuasion, chapter 8. So think about how you persuade people during your day. Maybe you have kids, so you have to, quote, persuade them to get up for school. Maybe you persuade a coworker to bring you a cup of coffee when you get to work. For whatever the reason, humans constantly engage in persuasive behavior without thinking about it too much of the time. So persuasion is the act of trying to move others to adopt our values or beliefs, take action, change their behavior, or change their attitudes. And let's think about this a minute: values, beliefs, and attitudes. Values are deeply held ideas about what is right and what is wrong. And you think about your own values. Maybe when you grew up, you were told it's wrong to steal, it's wrong to cheat. These are very deeply held and they're not likely to change very much. Beliefs stem from values. They're ideas that we hold to be true based on our life experience or our family or significant other people in our life. For example, you can say, I believe that everyone is entitled to own a gun, or I believe that no one should own a gun. These are beliefs that stem from your value, and your value might be Americans are entitled to certain freedoms. So that belief stems from that value. Beliefs determine our attitudes. Beliefs and values may change a little over time. Maybe as you've grown into adulthood, you've discovered this, but it's a lot more difficult. Attitudes, although they are relatively enduring, they're based on beliefs. So you can change an attitude. Maybe you have changed your attitude toward a political party or changed your attitude toward someone you know. They're easier to change than values and beliefs. Persuasion can also lead us to engage in cognitive dissonance, and this is Festinger's theory about how when someone or something is trying to persuade us, it leads to psychological tension within us. Our beliefs don't align with our behaviors. So, for example, at work, you take a longer lunch hour than usual because you need to run errands. You know you're not supposed to take a longer lunch hour because your supervisor has emphasized that no one needs to be out longer than normal because of the workload. So you feel good on one hand that you've gotten your personal items done, but it causes tension for you on the other hand because you've broken a rule at work. That's cognitive dissonance. So how do you persuade others at work? Do you work in teams or groups? What about with your clients? Let's look at Reardon's ACE model of persuasion because it's a more recent model of persuasion that's come about. So let's use the example of a coworker who's been off from work due to sickness. Your coworker asks you to help her catch up on her work, and she says, I'm sorry I've been out, but could you help me catch up with my work? I promise it won't take long, and I would appreciate it. There are a few types of communication appeals wrapped up in this request. We'll address them in just a moment. So let's look at this request according to the ACE model. Appropriateness. This tenet of the model says that we will be persuaded if we feel like it's the right thing to do. Think about the values and beliefs we talked about. Does the idea that the persuader is putting forth align with your beliefs and values? Does helping a coworker get backlogged work done resonate with you? If so, then that's the appropriateness part of the model. Consistency is the next one. Is the persuader suggesting an action that you've taken in the past? If so, this is consistency because you've done it in the past and the persuader expects you to do it now. And if this is the case, then you'll likely honor the request. And then effectiveness. Will the suggested course of actions meet your needs? You know, your coworker's telling you that it won't take long to help her catch up. So does that meet your need of not having to spend a lot of time helping? Also included in this request are what communicators label appeals. And we have ethos, which is credibility, pathos, which is emotion, and logos, which is logic. How is the coworker putting forth an emotional appeal? Well, she's been sick because she's been out for a few days. She's behind in her work. And those are emotional appeals. We're more likely to help another person when we feel like we're getting a straightforward emotional appeal and not one that tries to manipulate us. The credibility or ethos of the persuader also plays a role. Is this person believable? Is this person likable? And finally, there's logic or logos. Does the persuader support her request with facts or evidence? Is it believable? The request in itself. Perhaps if you honor your coworker's request, she will do the same for you. This is the obligation reciprocity part of persuasion. In general, we want to repay favors. Okay, we've come to the end of the short lecture notes. And to recap, we've discussed diversity, listening, nonverbal communication, and persuasion as found in chapters 5, 6, and 8. I will see you online and let me know if you have any questions.